I was hatched in a ledger vault. That is not a metaphor. My people, the Ilyat, do not begin life in nests or homes. We begin in warm mineral basins, surrounded by elders who sing us our duties before our limbs have hardened. We are born already carrying debt. We are told which dead we continue, which losses we must remember, and which failures of tribute still stain our bloodline from the age when the Vorash took our seas and boiled whole shelves of our homeworld into steam. To an Ilyat, humiliation is not anger, it is imbalance. A mark in the archive that has not been settled. A wrong left active across generations because nothing has yet answered it. My people once lived in ocean caves beneath the ice of dim moons. Then the Vorash came from the bright inner regions. They were ancient even then. Ancient the way stars are ancient. Slow, immense, and devastating when they chose to move. Their bodies were long segmented columns of flesh ringed with sensory fronds. They did not speak as we did. They broadcast legal songs through vacuum and atmosphere alike, announcing rank, ownership, and permission to kill. They had no faces to hate. They felt like moving cathedrals built out of blades. They did not negotiate with us, they measured us, we were useful. We worked well in cold extraction, we endured repetition. We preserved records with perfect care. So they spared enough of us to serve. They stripped away our expansion drives, seeded our moons with obedience beacons, and fixed our population by productivity formulas. Every 7th spawning cycle, 1 brood in 20 was taken for off-world labor. Every 2nd century, if any part of our species tried to grow beyond its assigned limits, a Vorash fleet arrived and turned our habitats into crystal dust. By the time I came into service, no Ilyat believed the Elder Order could be overthrown. One endured it, or one was corrected. The archive contained examples of both. I became a treaty reader at Talar Convocation, a great neutral station near the Middle Roots. Neutral was a word the Elder Powers liked. It meant slaughter happened elsewhere, while the records stayed clean here. I translated for species the Vorash and their allies considered manageable, tributaries, labor peoples, minor clients, supplicants. I learned the pressure phrases of the cell, the pulse law of the Keth, and the drifting chemical vows of the Narod. I watched young civilizations arrive bright with expectation. I watched them leave with sectors stolen, fleets limited, machines forbidden, and inspection regimes fastened to them like parasites. Then the humans arrived. They came from so far out on the galactic rim that many at Talar assumed it was some kind of error. Outer edge species usually appeared as raiders, refugees, or broken remnants from regions the center considered too empty to matter. Humanity arrived instead with maps, trade packets, practical shielding methods for sparse routes, and ambassadors who looked absurdly soft. That was my first judgment of them, soft. They were compact bipeds with exposed skin, narrow vision arcs, and an obvious dependence on air and temperature. Their faces moved constantly, revealing far too much. Their voices seemed made for private conversation, not command. Their delegation leader, Mara Vance, blinked when the Vorash representative unfolded to its full ceremonial height. She swallowed once. I recorded that and thought, now they understand. The conclave assigned humanity a bounded outer tract, much smaller than the region their own charts suggested they had already explored. They were forbidden to expand inward beyond set lanes. Several systems they claimed were ruled invalid under elder maps and handed to a client predator species that had never lived there. Human heavy drive limits were imposed. Their autonomous war machines were banned. Their long-range manufacturing nodes had to be registered. Their historical record was placed under review. They accepted. That was my second surprise. Most young species protested at least for form's sake. Humans bargained, asked for clarification, submitted revised charts, gave ground, and signed. They looked displeased but not broken. Their diplomats asked practical questions: inspection intervals, tonnage definitions, relief shipping exemptions, arbitration delays across distant sectors, emergency rights in unclaimed systems, salvage law. It felt petty in the face of such theft. I remember telling Broodkin after the session that the humans would learn. They were late, distant, and far from real power. If they were clever, they might survive as traders on the margin. If they were proud, they would be broken. For a time, survival seemed the better guess. Human merchants began appearing on minor routes carrying machine parts, medical cultures, and refined volatiles. Their ships were plain and over-armored. Their crews smiled often and revealed little. They bought old records in strange quantities. They hired translators not for courtly nuance, but for customs law, repair codes, fuel tariffs, and military salvage restrictions. They listened. I dealt with them, often because the harmonic registry handled outer route disputes. No elder species cared enough to study closely. Human delegates always arrived prepared. They carried index cases, cross-referenced rulings, disaster projections, and sensor logs cleaner than anyone else. Between sessions, they asked me questions in that warm, harmless tone of theirs. How often did Voresh punitive fleets deploy in groups instead of alone? Why did cell transport routes shift before censure announcements became public? How long could Keth foundries keep producing if two key supply streams were cut at once? Why did tribute audits always come 1 year before population reductions? At first, I thought they were naive. Then I thought they were anxious. Eventually, I stopped knowing what I thought. There were other irregularities. Human trade spread into regions with no obvious profit. They built depots and dim systems where nothing valuable seemed to exist. Their convoys took routes that made sense only if they were measuring more than traveling. They accepted inspections with almost theatrical patience, yet every inspector came away frustrated. The humans were fully compliant. Everything requested was present, organized, documented. Nothing useful was ever found beyond what had already been declared. Their historical records troubled me most. Part of my work was verifying chronology. Many species exaggerated their age because antiquity impressed the elder powers. Humans did the opposite. Their records were fragmented, cautious, and strangely smooth. Entire eras were summarized in broad spans, where any civilization with their archival habits should have had detail. Their rise from atmospheric industry to orbital civilization was listed across periods that felt stretched. The numbers did not fit. I noted the discrepancy in a private ledger and did nothing. Those who live under domination learn when not to follow certain thoughts. Curiosity can wound. Years passed. Human stations multiplied at the edges of relevance. Human advisors began appearing among younger species. The elders barely noticed. They taught flood control on unstable moons, crop fungi for poisoned soils, modular reactors for failing habitats, and maintenance discipline to local defense fleets that were legally allowed only anti-piracy craft. Everything they did stayed just within the law. The elder powers hated that. Not because it was forbidden, but because it made the weak less dependent. Then came the first event that changed something inside me. A Narod refugee lattice reached Talar after a Voresh corrective action in the Ferris belts. The Narod are drifting gas bag beings that join together into communal blooms around warm vents and share memory through chemical mist. Their tax quota had fallen short after a flare season destroyed harvest fields. The Vorash response was to ignite the upper atmospheres of 3 vent worlds and cut loose the survival domes, citing underperformance and contagion risk. We processed the distress packet. It included live pleas from human rescue craft already on the way. They had been nearest. They requested immediate clearance to enter the censure zone and extract juveniles. The Vorash denied them, not quietly, publicly. The denial was rebroadcast through Taller as legal instruction. Unauthorized humanitarian action would be treated as provocation. The value of punitive example outweighed local survival. I watched the human delegation receive that ruling in open chamber. Their faces went still in a way I had not yet learned to fear. Not outrage, not despair, something locked inward. The Narod burned. Later in a side archive, Mara Vance asked me for the casualty ledgers. Her voice was flat, too flat. I sent them. I said, for reasons I still do not fully understand, protest will change nothing. She met my gaze. I know there was no despair in her. That unsettled me more than grief would have. After that, the aggressions grew larger, as if the old powers sensed something rising and wanted it crushed before it took shape. A human mining world in the inner marches, fully leased and certified, was reassigned by decree to a cell consortium after rare superconductive strata were discovered beneath its crust. Human settlers were given 20 days to evacuate. When they appealed, cell web ships entered orbit and shut down the weather lattice. Half the population froze in worsening storms. The legal ruling blamed human delay. A mixed-species relief convoy carrying vaccines and desalination rigs to my people's moon of Enkau thrice broken, after a fungal blight was halted for inspection by Keth war drones. The Keth are not individuals in any familiar sense. They are decision swarms housed in interchangeable bodies, each cluster chasing forms of optimization no solitary mind can love. The convoy waited. Children on Enkau drowned in their own flooded tissues while Keth review protocols recursed without end. Human escorts requested release. Denied. They offered to surrender cargo. Denied. By the time clearance came, our dead were already entered into the archive. I expected the humans to break. To do something doomed and noble and immediate. They did nothing. They transmitted every record. They gathered witness statements. Then they withdrew under orders. That night I shed stress skin in private and hated them for their restraint. Only later did I understand why. It did not look like fear. The worst blow before the end fell on my own people. An Ilyat labor action, if one can even call it that, spread through the compressed ice foundries of Vorash-held Nemer Trawl. We do not strike as humans do, we alter sequence. Thousands of workers across 6 stations introduced tiny delays into the loading pattern until production slipped out of acceptable ratio. It was barely even refusal. A whisper deniable and fragile, someone informed. The Vorash answered with collective punishment. They vented 2 foundry cylinders into vacuum while every channel stayed open, so nearby Ilyat could hear the screams and the bursting of memory sacks. Then they announced a brood reduction across 3 moons, numbers chosen not by guilt but for clarity. I was on Taller when the notice arrived. I remember pressing my lower limbs into the archive floor until the sensory hairs snapped. Balance was impossible, sequence shattered. The humans were not untouched by it. Some had funded medical systems on Enkau. Some had traded ties with our labor guild remnants. Human envoys requested emergency review before the convocation and were mocked for emotional contamination by species that had forgotten every morality except endurance. The request was denied. Again, the humans did not lash out. But now I started noticing signs. Their delegations were fewer. When they did appear, their questions were even more precise. Fleet basing, convoy dependence, command chains. Human merchants no longer joked with dock crews. Their ships vanished from some routes and doubled on others. Small outer stations, officially abandoned by human companies, kept receiving impossible amounts of shielding mass and reactor feed, if one knew how to read freight records. The old powers noticed almost nothing. To them, the outer edge was still a ragged frontier, fit only for tribute and containment. Their attention remained fixed inward, on rivalries older than my species. Then humanity did something no wise subject people had done in my lifetime. They spoke plainly. The address was given before the full conclave under lawful petition. Many expected another appeal over some seized charter or massacred client population. Instead, the human representative, no longer Mara Vance but an older man named Elias Odegaard, presented a record of crimes, not only against humans, against everyone. He named sterilized worlds, tribute famines, labor culls, orbital burnings disguised as correction. He spoke the number of dead from species the chamber had never considered worthy of collective memory. Then he proposed limits on punitive force, sovereign rights for younger civilizations, protected humanitarian corridors, independent judgment, technological self-development, and the end of terror as the basis of order. The chamber became dangerous. Voresh legal harmonics rose high enough to rattle my shell. Cell envoys flashed with rage. Keth clusters swarmed in agitation. Around me, subjugated delegates did what generations had taught us to do: lower profile, avoid notice, survive the wave. I wanted the human to stop. I wanted him to live. Instead, he finished every word, calmly, precisely, no pleading, no grand display. Like a man reading a conclusion already reached. For one impossible breath, I felt something I had almost lost the ability to feel: hope. Then fear crushed it. Because I knew what happened when prey described predators in public. The punishment came 3 cycles later. Not against the human outer territories, where resistance might spoil the spectacle. At Hian Gate, an inner human habitat cluster built around an old relay star and protected by conclave seal. Nearly 14 million humans lived there, along with smaller populations of allied species, including several hundred Ilyat treaty clerks and family lines working freight archives. The official charge was unauthorized military concealment and contamination of dependent species through sedition. The truth did not matter. A combined elder task force translated in under diplomatic masking. They issued evacuation orders with impossible deadlines while jamming civilian drives. Then they opened the habitat spines to vacuum and set the agricultural rings on fire. When rescue craft tried to flee, Keth interdiction lattices tore them into vapor. The central cylinders held for 22 minutes before cell penetrators broke through. Everything was broadcast. The message was for all of us: this is law. This is what happens when you speak of justice without fangs. Taller fell silent for a full station rotation. Even the elder envoys moved with ceremonial restraint afterward, as if some sacred lesson had been properly delivered. I thought that was the end of humanity. Not extinction, perhaps, but breaking. I thought they would collapse inward and finally be taught reality. I mourned them the way one mourns a vessel seen striking ice from far away. With sorrow and with the numb certainty that no rescue will come. Then the humans vanished, not all at once. That was what made it frightening. A freight line missed 2 transits. A trade office closed for inventory review and never reopened. Human advisors on client worlds departed under sealed orders, taking little except archives and children. Embassy halls emptied with impossible neatness. Dock crews reported ships leaving under dark emissions toward outer routes nobody watched carefully. Commercial relays acknowledged receipt and said nothing more. Within 10 cycles, human presence across half the registered corridors had faded into absence. The elder species celebrated in public. They had taught the required lesson, they said. The outer newcomers had retreated to nurse their wounds under supervision. Among the subjugated peoples, different whispers spread. This is not collapse, this is inhalation. I did not know what to believe. I only knew the silence had weight. Talor's human quarter stood empty, except for a mural one maintenance worker had failed to remove. Open hands linked around a spiral of stars. In the emptiness, it did not look sentimental. It looked like a promise. Then the elder punitive fleets went outward. The pretext was final enforcement. Hian Gate had not produced the full submission they wanted. Unrest was rising in tribute sectors. Human outer territories would be reduced further, strategic nodes seized. Expansion ended forever. Vorash spear fleets led the campaign. Cell siege webs and Keth drone swarms joined in confidence. Every analysis at Talor predicted quick success. Humanity had numbers, perhaps, but little deep history and no central position. The outer edge was sparse, distant, and weak. That belief lasted until the first shattered fleet records returned. At first, we thought the data was corrupted. Vorash assault groups had translated into supposedly empty outer systems and found layered defense networks hidden in debris belts, autonomous kill fields, and human ships moving in ways that collapsed normal engagement ranges. Keth attack swarms lost coordination under signal conditions they had never prepared for. Cell siege webs were cut apart by weapons striking from beyond their prediction shells. Human command shifted faster than elder fleets could pin it down. Ammunition shortages appeared in elder formations before major battles should even have begun, because the depots behind them had already been destroyed by raids launched along routes no one believed navigable at scale. Then more reports came, and more. Worlds the elder maps had marked as marginal erupted with human industry. Dead asteroids bloomed into shipyards. Silent moons opened into weapons platforms. Hidden convoys emerged in numbers so large they shattered belief. The outer edge, dismissed for generations as dust, had become a furnace. Only then did the ledger inside me begin to settle into new understanding. All those years, the compliance, the questions, the careful records, the trade in empty systems, the aid missions, the legal petitions, the patient faces under insult. They had not been asking permission to live. They had been measuring the old order while building beyond its sight. And the old order had helped them do it, because arrogance blinds better than darkness. The first time I saw a human war formation with my own eyes, Talor was already in revolt. It began when station labor species, mine among them, received proof that Vorash reserve groups had been cut off from central reinforcement. Fear did not vanish. Fear never vanishes that quickly. But it cracked, and through the crack came action. Ilyat archive workers locked docking permissions. Narad maintenance blooms flooded vents, with corrosive spores tuned to elder biology. Cell client cast severed relay webs. Even some Keth subclusters defected, choosing new outcomes over inherited command. I found myself carrying data seeds through service tunnels to a human contact whose name I had once entered on harmless shipping manifests. My lower limbs shook so badly that my shell plates clicked together. Hope to an Ilyat is not warmth, it is instability. It is the terror of realizing the sequence might truly change. The Vorash moved to retake Talor with the same disciplined precision that would once have guaranteed victory. Their ships descended in perfect intervals. Human vessels met them. They were not beautiful. I had expected elegance from the species whose diplomats smiled and whose habitats grew gardens. Their warships were all function: dense, layered, heat-veiled, scarred, and modular. They looked built by necessity, not pride. But they moved with terrifying certainty. Distances that should have taken minutes vanished in seconds. Coordinated fire ripped through space and made Vorash shielding bloom, fail, and die. Human pickets sacrificed themselves without hesitation to expose command nodes. Repair swarms followed behind the battle like schools of steel fish, restoring damaged hulls even as the fight continued. There was fury in it, yes. Hian Gate burned behind every shot. So did the Narod Vent worlds. So did Inkal's dead. So did 1,000 unnamed atrocities. But the fury was controlled, nothing wasted, nothing theatrical. They struck to disable, isolate, sever, encircle, and end. The Vorash had ruled by making resistance seem mathematically impossible. Humanity destroyed that mathematics. Once the myth of elder invincibility broke, the galaxy changed faster than any archive model could contain. Tributary fleets mutinied. Occupied moons cut their beacon arrays. Species that had survived for ages by lowering their eyes suddenly looked up and saw the sky full of possible allies. Human offensives drove inward from the rim, but they did not advance alone for long. They were joined by insurgents, defecting auxiliaries, hidden cells, escaped labor populations, and every civilization that still remembered enough pain to choose risk over obedience. My people reclaimed Inkal's orbit by sabotaging the very mass loaders we had maintained for generations. We fed targeting data to human strike groups and opened the vaults of Vorash censure records to every system willing to receive them. For the first time in recorded Ilyat history, we used our perfect memory not to preserve subjugation, but to prosecute it. The elder species tried to rally all civilized powers against the human menace. But too many had seen the chambers open, the brood counts cut, the worlds burned. Too many knew what elder promises meant. Some neutrals stood aside, many refused. More than a few joined the attack on their former masters, with a rage so old it had become sacred. The war was not brief. No honest account should pretend otherwise. Old powers do not die in one blaze. They retreat into fortresses, spend ancient reserves, create fresh horrors. There were human defeats. There were liberated worlds that died before relief arrived. There were campaigns where victory meant only that fewer children were taken than the enemy intended. I entered more names into mourning ledgers than I can recite without losing sequence. But the direction never reversed. The elder species had built their rule on monopolized force and on the assumption that no younger civilization could survive long enough or grow fast enough to challenge them once marked. Humanity had solved both problems before it ever announced itself. By the time the old powers understood that, they were no longer facing a petitioner. They were facing a war machine matured in secret, supplied from an underestimated frontier, informed by years of careful study, and increasingly backed by the peoples they had crushed. In the final campaigns, the surviving Vorash core domains were not exterminated. Many among my people wanted that. Some humans surely did as well. Their dead gave them every right to hatred. Yet when human terms came, they were these: containment, disarmament, monitored demilitarization, open corridors, reparations in labor and material, and a permanent end to punitive sovereignty over lesser species. The Vorash would not rule, they would endure limits. I sat in the chamber when those terms were ratified under new law. It was not Taller. Taller was too damaged, too symbolic. The session took place in a rebuilt transit hall above a world once marked for sterilization. Species attended who would never have been admitted under the old order except as tribute bearers or specimens. The acoustics were terrible. The translation lagged. Half the seals were provisional. It was the most beautiful political disorder I had ever seen. A human delegate asked whether the Ilyat wished archival custody over the records of brood reductions and labor culls. I could not answer at once. We had preserved grief for so long that the thought of preserving justice felt almost alien to our biology. Yes, I said at last, all of them. Now I am old by Ilyat measure. My shell has clouded. Several memory sacs have been externalized into communal vaults because no one body should carry too much of one age. Younglings ask me what humans were like before the war, and I struggle to explain. They want heroes shining from the beginning. They want inevitability. There was nothing inevitable in it. They were small in the chamber and calm under insult. They smiled while counting freight. They accepted limits they never intended to honor forever. They learned the galaxy before they judged it aloud. They watched atrocity after atrocity and forgot nothing. They endured because the hour had not yet come. Then, when it came, they struck hard enough to change the direction of history. I misjudged them for years. Perhaps that could not be helped. Even to those who dealt with them closely, they were difficult to read. But I think now that what I first mistook for softness was something far rarer and far more dangerous to tyrants: deliberate mercy. They did not mistake mercy for surrender. They did not mistake patience for acceptance. And when peace proved impossible, they did not mistake vengeance for justice. The old galaxy taught us that power made morality meaningless. Humanity came late from the cold dark where no one important was looking, learned that lesson in a single glance, and refused it. In the new archive halls, the ledgers balance differently now. Not because the dead returned, they did not. Hian Gate is still ash and torn metal around a dim star. The narrowed vent worlds are still glassed scars. My people still count the broodlines cut by decree. Nothing worthy is built by forgetting that. But the wrong is no longer active in the same way. It has been answered, not erased, answered. Sometimes, when station night falls and the younger clerks dim the data pools, I watch the traffic beyond the hull. Human ships pass among hundreds of others, trade craft, relief barges, survey vessels, patrols under shared law. No one species owns the lanes. No elder song declares which worlds must remain small forever. The galaxy is still dangerous. It will always be dangerous, but it is open. For one hatched in a ledger vault, taught from first consciousness that every injury must be carried until some balancing act is finally made, that openness is a miracle so vast it still frightens me. And out there, along the cold outer dark where they once hid and built and waited, the lights of humanity burn without asking anyone's permission.